Hi. Have you ever thought of yourself as a big shot? Present rulers of this world think that. Jesus even had that problem with some of his disciples. In the English language, there's one word that can stir up all kinds of trouble. You know what it is? It's the word greatest. Have you ever used that word? Muhammad Ali, he was a prize fighter. He used it all the time. He used to say, "I'm the greatest." Any two people, when they get together, they'll often say, "Who's the greatest?" And for sure, it'll always stir up trouble. Who was the greatest hockey player? Gordie Howe? Or was it Gretzky? Who was the greatest president? Was it Washington? Or was it Abe Lincoln? Who was the greatest actor? Was it Carlton Heston? Or was it Christopher Plummer? How about the greatest singer? Was it Julie Andrews? Or maybe Judy Garland? What about the greatest preacher? Was it Spurgeon? Or maybe a modern Billy Graham? If somebody said to you, "What is the best car?" what would you tell them? Mercedes? Cadillac? What's your best university if you're going to send your kids? Harvard? Maybe in Oxford over in London or in England. What's the best city? If you were to go and choose a city, which one would you pick? Paris? How about Calgary? There's something about the word greatest that stirs our juices in all of us. I wonder why that is. I think it has something to do about how we care. We use greatness to describe performance. We use greatness to describe preference. We use greatness to describe work done. We use greatness to describe our families. We'll use greatness to describe our schools, our leaders, our entertainers. We even use that to describe our churches. Jesus used that word to describe his followers. If you read Matthew 5, here's what he said. Some of you would be least in the kingdom of heaven, while others would be the greatest. What's the difference? That's what I want to talk about today. How would you define greatness? What do you have to do to attain it? Well, especially on a spiritual level. Jesus teaches us the secret in Matthew chapter 20. God wants all of us to be great. Jesus' disciples, after 3 years of following him, they started a fight. They began to fight among each other. Who's the greatest? That was their problem. Now Jesus is going to teach them a lesson, and he's going to teach it to us. There are two things in this lesson that I want you to see. The first one, what makes a big shot? And two, what makes a little shot? First, the big shot. One of your greatest hindrances in life is pride. Jesus is leaving Jericho. He's just journeyed down the Jordan River to Jericho, and now he's going to climb the hill 14 miles to the city of Jerusalem. He's only got 2 weeks left to live. He's going to die. He's going to die in the next 2 weeks. He's going to die on a cross. He's going to be executed. He was approached by the mother of James and John. And she came to Jesus and she knelt down at his feet. Now, it wasn't an act of worship. That's not what she was doing. She had something else in mind. She wanted to ask Jesus for a favor. Now, Jesus knew what she wanted. He could see right through her behavior. And you know, it's amazing what people think they can get from Jesus if they just come and they kneel down in front of him. Have you ever thought of that? What does this woman want? Because what she wants, nothing has really changed over the years. Everybody else wants the same. She came for the same purpose. Now, the lady's name was Salome. That doesn't mean anything to you, but if I tell you who she was, it will. She was the sister of Jesus' mother, Mary. That makes James and John, his two disciples, Jesus' first cousins. I'll begin with a story, and I'll read it from verse 20 of Matthew 20. And you follow along and kind of catch the flavor of what he's saying. It was about that time that the mother of the Zebedee brothers came with her two sons, and they knelt before Jesus with this request. What do you want? Jesus said to them. She said, give your word that these two sons of mine will be rewarded the highest place of honor in your kingdom. One on your right hand and the other sitting on your left. In other words, Salome is talking about greatness. She taught her boys that they were greater than the other 12. And they were going to get rewarded for it. And maybe it was the blood that was flowing through their veins, because they were related to Jesus. They had an inside track. The mother was looking for power, and the mother was looking for authority, and she was going to use it through her two kids. Now, do you see yourself like that? She wanted her two boys, in other words, to become Jesus' big shots, lord it over others, have people under them. What she didn't know, and what she was about to find out, God doesn't measure greatness the way men do. You and I measure greatness with an altogether different attitude than does God. Let me explain. Harvard University built a new building to house their philosophy department. A stone lintel was placed above the main entrance, and it was supposed to carry the inscription depicting the purpose of what the department stood for. One of the leading professors was asked to write the inscription, and having thought it through very carefully and endlessly, he came up with a phrase that he borrowed from the ancient Greeks in their philosophy, and it said, "Man is the measure of all things." To this professor, greatness takes place when mankind is at the center of life. Some months passed and the building was finished, and the professor left his office and he walked past the front of the building and he saw the lintel above the door and he wanted to see the inscription that he had told the president. Did he ever get a surprise? His words weren't there. Something else had been written. Instead of finding his suggestion, he read this word, and it was quoted from the Bible. It said, "What is man, that thou art mindful of him? The president saw beyond the professor what the professor couldn't see, because the president was a Christian. And he saw greatness through what God saw. In verse 22, Jesus goes on. You don't know what you're asking, he says to Salome. There's a price to be involved in greatness. You don't ascend greatness. It's not something you climb. It's the very opposite. You descend to greatness. It's not exalting yourself. It's humbling yourself. Remember what John the Baptist said after he had baptized Jesus? He must increase and I must decrease. That's greatness. Secondly, greatness is characterized by service. Little shots, they run on a fuel that I call service. When Salome made her request, something strange happened. Here it is. I'll read it for you. When the 10 others heard about this, they lost their temper. And they were thoroughly disgusted with the other 2 brothers. Jesus got them together, and he began to settle things down. Remember, Jesus is heading off to Calvary. In 2 weeks, he's going to be dead because of the crucifixion. These 2 brothers are jockeying for some personal position. But so were the other 10. That's why they lost their temper. When Mary and I were married, I had a little rural church out in the country. One of our ladies brought me a lovely homemade apple pie. Huge thing. Took it home. The next morning, Mary, she took it to work. And she didn't tell me. She was a school teacher. There were 8 or 10 other teachers in that community school. And they shared that beautiful apple pie together and thoroughly had a great time and enjoyed it. Well, when I got home, I asked her, I said, you know, I've been thinking all day about that pie. I can't wait to have a bite. Well, then she told me what she had done. I got indignant. I told her, well, how could you be so selfish? How could you be so inconsiderate? But you know what really upset me? I was upset because I didn't think of it first. Have you ever wondered why these disciples got mad at James and John? I know why. They didn't think of it first. They ended up kicking themselves because if you want to ask Jesus for a real special favor, you send your mother. And that's what they did. Now comes verse 25. This is one of the best sermons I think Jesus ever preached. Jesus got them together and he settled things down. He said, you've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, how quickly a little power goes to their head. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great and the greatest, he has to become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you, he must now become a slave. That's what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, and he came to give away his life. The world says Greatness means doing whatever you have to do, to whoever you have to do it to, in order to get to the top and stay at the top. That's what the world says. There's a problem with that, however. It doesn't last. Someone else is going to inherit your money. Someone else is going to take over your business. Somebody else is going to steal the respect that you think belongs to you. Your greatness will never be enough. There will always be another accomplishment. There's always going to be more money to make, and there's going to be more trophies in that trophy case. Jesus spoke two words which speak of greatness. Whoever wants to be great first must be a servant. The Greek word for deacon is the same word used as servant. It means server. The world says that greatness is found in being served. God says the opposite. Greatness is found in serving, not somebody doing something for you. Verse 27. The other key to greatness is the word slave. You must, said Jesus, become a slave. It's the word doulos in Greek. Translated means one who is solely interested in the will of his master. Greatness is measured by obedience. Greatness is measured by love. Greatness is measured by giving. And it's also measured by sacrifice for God and others. Jesus gave his life a ransom. Did you ever know that? Ransom was the price paid for the freedom of one that was held captive. That's the story of the cross. What have I said? When you put giving over getting, serving over being served, you become great in the eyes of God. John Lewis Shuck. He was attending a church service in September of 1835. He was the first Baptist missionary to China. During that church service, a special offering was being received for foreign missions. John Lewis Shuck had no money. He was out of work, penniless. He was an accountant, but he was also a very excellent student of Scripture. When the offering plate was passed up the aisle, he became anxious and he wanted to put something in the plate, even though he had nothing there to put in. The Lord spoke to him and he said, John, do you know that you could serve me over there in China? You could be a foreign missionary. You could go to the work. John, would you go? If I asked you, would you go? He took out a piece of paper and he scribbled on that piece of paper something. While others were giving dollars and others were giving checks when the offering plate was passed, he dropped that piece of paper in the collection plate as it was passed by. After the service, while the money was being counted, a note was discovered that simply said this: Myself, John Lewis Shuck. That offering is what God is looking for. All he wants from you is you. If you do, you're going to have found something in greatness. "32 years ago, something happened in my life that changed me. Now, that's 50 years ago. Clergy, they're funny birds. They want wonderful titles. The Very Reverend. Who's called the Very Reverend? His Most Holy Eminence. Who calls anybody that? When I was 32 years old, I was at a seminary out in the middle Midwest of the States. I was married, had 2 boys. and I was taking my doctorate. One day after class, one of my colleagues said to me, "You know, Ron, we're going to have to get our doctorate, because if we don't, we'll never get the big church." I said, "What? That's why you want your doctorate, so you can get a big church?" "Oh, yeah." Well, we graduated, and I followed him. He did get his big church. And it was big, 4,000 members. He had an office as big as my small church when I started out in the country, where two roads crossed. He had wall-to-wall oak bookcases, floor-to-ceiling. But this is the part that I couldn't get over. He also had an ensuite. He had a toilet, a little bathroom, as part of his office, private. When he locked the door, he was home. One day, while he was pastoring that church, he came in on a Monday morning and he asked the janitor if he could borrow a stepladder. And he says, "Sure, what are you going to do, Pastor?" "Well," he said, "I'm going to move some of those books at the top that I can't reach." "Fine." So he brought him the ladder and he shut the door. And then when 10 o'clock came, he didn't come out. And then when 11 o'clock came, he didn't come out. When 12 o'clock came, he didn't come out. When 1 o'clock came, they began to worry. They said, "Where's the pastor?" The janitor, he took his master key and he opened the door and he went in, and there was nobody there. And then the janitor looked for his ladder and he couldn't see the ladder. Well, where'd that go? And then he went into the ensuite, and there he found his ladder. But you know what else he found? He found this colleague of mine. He had taken the ceiling tile out of the drop ceiling, and he hung himself. He had died in the ensuite, having gotten his big church. But he was gone. He left a wife and 2 kids, and it devastated the entire church. You know, from that moment on, I never, ever used any of letters at the end of my name. I didn't feel worthy. I looked at this story that Jesus told, and there's what came right there in front of me. And I changed. That was 50 years ago, and I'm still the same boy that I thought 50 years ago I could become now, and I still am. You know, I've been reading the story of Arthur Ashe. He was a tennis player, and he was black. He grew up in Richmond, Virginia. And he had a wonderful father. His mother died when he was just a young teen. His father couldn't read or write. They lived in a very poor area of Richmond, Virginia. In that neighborhood was a black medical doctor who had a big backyard. And for some reason, he decided to take that backyard and turn it into a tennis court. And he invited Arthur Ashe to come and play with him. And they would. Little did he know in that backyard what he was doing for Arthur Ashe. That boy was a born champion tennis player, and he didn't know it. He began to hit the ball back and forth with this doctor, and he got better and better and better. He started to win tournaments. After high school, he was given a full scholarship to UCLA on their tennis team. He joined the United States Davis team, and they won the Davis Cup. He began to climb his way up the ladder in tennis. He won the U.S. Open. And then he won Wimbledon. Beautiful Wimbledon over in England. Never had they ever had a black champion win Wimbledon. That was the only time that Arthur Ashe's father came onto the court after the tournament was over just to give his son a hug. But you know, Arthur Ashe did something very beautiful. That man, he had heart surgery after he finished his career because his mother died early of heart disease. They put a zipper all the way through him and they changed 2 operations. And then on his second operation, when they were giving him a pint of blood in his recovery, that pint of blood was contaminated with HIV. He contracted AIDS and he died of AIDS But the thing I liked about Arthur Ashe was his example. Do you know that in all the days when he got to be the headline in every newspaper around the world in sports as one of the greatest tennis players, he never once did anything that would embarrass, chide, or discontent his father. He loved his dad. Even though his dad couldn't read or write, he and his brother, after they'd come home from high school, they'd open the newspaper and they'd read it for him. But he said, why didn't you say, when they were having all kinds of race riots, back in '69 when Martin Luther King was killed, Bobby Kennedy was killed. They said, speak up for your people. It's race rights. At no time did he ever defy his upbringing, his love for his dad and his mother, who he really hardly knew. But the example that he set for his father became my example. And how he treated his dad is how I treat my Father in heaven. What a great example he set. All right, we talked about big shots. Would you say you're a big shot? I hope you're not. What Jesus said to us, I want you to become a servant, and then I want you to be a slave. I want you to serve my Father in heaven. That's the story of Jesus making you a little shot. And I don't want you to ever forget that. When you leave me and come back next week, we'll look at something better and bigger. But always have that in mind. Who am I? Who do I want to be? Do you want to sit on the right or do you want to sit on the left? Jesus said, I want you to get on your hands and knees, and I want you to wash my feet. If you can wash their feet, Jesus says you're going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. See you next week.